Without objection.
First, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the privileges of the floor be granted to the following members of my staff: David Rosner, our detailee from FERC, and Sarah Stevenson, our American Association for the Advancement of Science Fellow, as of today until the end of Congress.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to ask unanimous consent to discharge and pass the American Vehicle Security Act, a bill I introduced with Senator Braun yesterday. Let me explain what we're trying to do and what we have done by passing the IRA. China has cornered the EV supply chain market. 80% of the world's battery materials processing comes from China. 60% of the world's cathode production comes from China. 80% of the world's anode production comes from China. And 75% of the world's lithium-ion battery cell production comes from China. Now, for the first time in the history of this great country of ours, in the transportation mode that gave inspiration to the whole world, whether it be cars, trains, and planes, did not depend on foreign supply chains for the motivation, did not any way at all depend on it. Now we are moving rapidly into the EV markets. And I think recklessly, as we were going into that, before we were able to supply and be held captive by China, literally. So anything the IRA bill did was saying this: if you're going to get the $7,500 credit, which I had a hard time understanding why the automotive industry needed it so desperately, because people were willing to wait a year to get the product. And we had supply chains with chips, we fixed that. We had supply chains still with this. And they're telling me, well, we can't do that. We just can't get there. And I said, you know what? They told us that we couldn't get there on a vaccine for COVID. It'd take 5 years. We got there in 9 months. You can do it if you intend to do it and you want to do it, you'll do it. So what we did is we said, fine, $3,750 credit you will be able to earn for the discount on that vehicle if the critical minerals are sourced from North America or our free trading agreement countries, so we don't have the risk of being held hostage. These are countries that we deal with day in, and we have relationships, and it's a free trade back and forth. China, we don't. Russia, we don't. We see what happens to the world when that happens. So this was the purpose of it. And the other $3,750 is if you manufacture the battery in North America, because of our NAFTA agreement and USMC that we've had for an awful long time. There's disruptive flow back and forth. That way we're guaranteed that we're going to have a manufacturing base and continue the long heritage and the long, basically, support that we have, that we can have control of our own destiny in our transportation mode. That's all. That's all this bill was doing. The bill's been characterized so many different ways, but it's truly an energy security manufacturing bill. And I can assure you, just coming back and talking to the Europeans, they are extremely challenged and upset that basically the United States, with one leap, jumped over everybody into first place and so far ahead of doing something and bringing manufacturing back, being self-sufficient and self-dependent. That's what this does, and we fixed that. We fixed all of that. And then the Treasury, failing to issue guidance, it puts more requirements. And what they're doing, they issued guidance by law, the bill said, by December 31st. They're in violation. So they don't have the guidance ready. They have plenty of time to do it, but they are now continuing to let the $7,500 credit go without any concerns at all by the critical mineral requirements. It's just not what the legislation is about. It's not what we all voted for. Every Democrat voted for this. And now all of a sudden we say, well, we're not going to pay attention to the rules. Regulations don't mean anything. Just go ahead and let them do what they want to do. Well, I'm sorry, that's not the way it is, and it's not the way it should be. And so, being the birthplace of Henry Ford, who put mass production back in and put the automobile in everyone's affordability range and basically transition who we are as a country and how we move around. We are an automotive powerhouse. We've always been it, an automotive powerhouse. And the sooner that we're able to source our own supplies that we need for our mode of transportation will maintain that powerhouse. That's what the IRA has done. That's the intent of the IRA. And I've asked the IRS to follow the law, follow the rule, follow the legislative intent, and basically the bill that we passed. And they are defying that. And this bill would correct that. That's all we're asking for. And with that, I yield to my friend from Indiana.
Mr. President.
Senator from Indiana.
So I rise today. Joe's gone over this, I think, very clearly. I support him in just sticking with the letter of the law. He said China produces 75% of the world's lithium-ion batteries. We only 7%. China controls 80% of facilities that convert critical minerals into usable battery parts. Making things in America not just about promoting our own manufacturing, which we need to do better generally, it's also about not funding the human rights abuses by the Chinese Communist Party. And to give them even more of a leg up when you see what they've done trying to fit into the world economic change, where they still steal intellectual property. They do things that take them out of the norm that we're all familiar with. This is just simply to fix something that was recently passed in a reconciliation bill. I didn't vote for the reconciliation package because of disagreements with it in general. I do that on a lot of things, even when I like components of what's in something, if it doesn't have that fiscal responsibility to go along with it. So whether you agree with me or Senator Manchin about trying to do things here in America whenever we can, and not to end up supporting our main geopolitical enemy in the process, I think you got to be careful. Senator Manchin mentioned also, we just recently did it, and it's clear. And the IRS was sleeping at the wheel. This should not have come down to where we're right here, even having to argue about it. It's the letter of the law. I've got, in my own home state, Stellantis, Samsung, making a big investment in Kokomo, Indiana, for this very issue of getting our own foot into this kind of business. What's it going to do? What's the message going to be sending to them? Allison Transmission is conducting R&D efforts on electrifying their own components. I think it sends a bad message if we are, given the letter of the law, going to make exemptions even when it might not be expedient for other concerns. So I think this is a type of investment that we need to make sure stays here. We recently put it in law to do so. It may delay a little bit, not give the speed at which some want to move, but when you look at everything we've talked about, the fact that it gives more to the Chinese economy when look at what they're doing on the world stage, it's going to send a bad message to people in our own country about making the investments, and clearly in my own state, there's a vested interest. So I'm with Senator Manchin on this. We ought to stick with what we just passed, not let the IRS get by with being delinquent on what they should have done in the first place. And with that, I yield back to the senator from West Virginia.
Mr. President,
Senator from
I
West
think
Virginia.
maybe I can help a little bit clearing it up. Everyone thinks that all of a sudden, that as the end of the year, the first of the year, that the automobile industry in the United States, in order to get any credit at all, had to have 100% of the sourcing done from North America or free trade country agreements, such as Australia, Chile, different people that have a tremendous amount of resources, that those are going to China now for processing, okay? If they only have, the first year is 40%, all we're saying is you ought to at least be able to source 40% the first year from the favored trading countries we have and ourselves to get us into this, and then it goes up 10% every year. Most reasonable, most reasonable. Why the IRS did not do their job, I can't tell you, unless their intent was never trying to comply with what we passed. They've known all along what this bill was, unless they just basically drug their feet intentionally. And knowing this, let me just tell you the other thing that really I couldn't even believe. They picked and chose. They didn't basically just say, well, I'm sorry, we don't have rules and regulations, so it can't go into effect. Or we're going to let it just like it was, 7,500? Oh, no. They chose, they like what we did with putting a cap on what your salary could be in order to get to 7,500. They used that. That wasn't it before. They used that part of it. They liked the cap of where we said what price of a vehicle would qualify. For a sedan, $55,000 and under. For a truck, $85,000. They picked and chose, cherry-picked. But they said, well, we're just going to continue to give the $7,500 if they find them categories. Nothing about sourcing the material, nothing about us jump-starting to be basically self-sufficient in the manufacturing of batteries in the United States of America, but also sourcing so we would never be run short and be held hostage by China or someone else. I'm old enough, and you're old enough, and most of us in this room has been old enough to remember in 1974, we stood in line to get gas to go work. I am not going to stand in line and wait for a battery to come to China for me to go to work. That's what this is all about. Thank you, Mr. President. Oh, hold on. I ask unanimous consent that the Finance Committee be discharged from further consideration of Senate Bill 63, a bill to adjust the effective date for application of certain amendments made with respect to the credit for new clean vehicles. The Senate proceed to its immediate consideration, the bill be considered, read a third time and passed, and that motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
The senator from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, let me say I'd take a backseat to no one on wanting to get out of China. There's no question about that. I authored the Buy America provisions with Senator Braun that are in the infrastructure bill. We have a Made in America office. We're bringing jobs home. We are making sure we're putting Michigan and American businesses and workers first. Absolutely. I also agree. I mean, Senator Manchin has, he and I have worked together on the clean energy manufacturing tax credits, 48C, which is critical. The advanced battery production tax credits, the things that Senator Braun talked about that is bringing jobs to Indiana from the Inflation Reduction Act around the credits that we have done for batteries and solar and wind and manufacturing and so on. We're all in that bill, which I was proud to help author and to support those efforts. And I support when Senator Manchin has said to those in other countries, if you want to benefit from our tax structure, move your plants to America. I've said that myself. You know that. And so I'm all for that. This particular credit is confusing. It was not well vetted. It is not supported by anyone in the industry who believes that they have the capacity immediately, right this minute, to meet the complicated formulas. They'd love to. We'd love it if we didn't have to worry about lithium from China. And they're working feverishly. In fact, there's a free trade agreement with Chile coming before this body. They have lithium deposits that would be very, very helpful to us. And I strongly support being able to make them a part of the free trade agreements in the legislation so that we can get the lithium from there, as well as other parts of the world. But we're not there yet, Mr. President. This does not create any path for success for American automobile workers, for American automobile companies, for suppliers, for consumers who are interested in being able to purchase electric vehicles and benefit from a credit, which, by the way, every other country has, including China. They have their own consumer credit. And so this is a situation where we disagree on how this was put together, how it's written, how it, the effect of it in terms of the dates and so on. But I have to say, on behalf of Treasury, who was given thousands of regulations to have to write by December 31, that it is not unreasonable that they took the time to listen and be thoughtful about how they did it, and that they announced they would be bringing these rules forward in March. That is not an unreasonable thing. It affects a huge industry, a foundational industry. Henry Ford, he's from Michigan. We are proud to have Henry Ford from Michigan. And by the way, he and Thomas Edison first tried to create an electric vehicle. That was the first choice until we decided as Congress to invest in oil and gas subsidies that took them in a different direction. Bottom line, it is not unreasonable what Treasury is doing, the path they are on. They have been given, I believe, an incredibly complicated task to try to figure out how this consumer credit will work for consumers and for the companies and workers. I don't disagree with the goals talked about. I don't disagree with anything that's been said, except it doesn't relate to what is happening in this credit, which doesn't work on a practical level. And I'm for whatever support and flexibility that we can provide to achieve what are the stated goals. So on behalf of American automobile companies, auto workers, and American consumers, I object.
Objection is heard. Senator for West Virginia.
Would the Senator yield for just a minute? Would she yield?
Senator,
The only thing I would say to that is this. The subsidies we were giving for EVs had expired under the old piece of legislation. For American manufacturers, they all hit their 200,000 cap, right?
Not all of them.
General Motors hit it?
Ford.
Ford hit it?
No,
Yep.
Ford didn't hit it.
Well, I thought they
No.
hit the right, yeah.
No,
Okay.
Toyota hadn't hit it.
And Toyota hit it?
Not yet.
I'm understanding they did. So let's say, okay, we'll work that. But it was very close to it, they didn't. That was over for them. They'd got no more. It was over. It was over. They were done. If we didn't do anything, they were done. You know, the only people that had access to our market, if we had not done this bill, was all European manufacturers. All the manufacturers in the United States already hit their cap. So I'm saying it was over. We gave them new life into this. And all we're saying is, can't we at least get manufacturing in the United States of America where we're not depending on foreign supply chains, especially China? That's the difference. And I mean, they knew the bill. They didn't like the bill. They built their whole model around, you would think the car manufacturers in America is going to go broke if they don't get $7,500 credit from the United States Treasury. And there's people waiting a year. I said, let me tell you something. If you're waiting a year to get a product because you like it and it's good and you make it better than any place in the world, I don't think that is what you're making a decision on. Because they were lost it. And China could have flooded the market. We stopped all of that from happening. So we just have a difference. We just have a difference.
Mr. President.
Senator from Michigan.
Yeah. First of all, China can now flood the market because we're not going to be able to meet these criteria in terms of being able to get the credit. They got their own credit, and there's no reason they're not going to be able to flood the U.S. market. I have a difference of opinion about what this actually means, but this is what I would say. We've had three parts of the stool on supporting moving forward on a new electric transportation model. One is charging stations. We did in the infrastructure bill, really important, have charging stations. Number two, helping create production through the battery and the clean energy tax credits and so on. Third is helping to bring costs down at the beginning until volume comes up. Now, the reason people are waiting for cars is because of the lack of chips. I mean, they're waiting because, and we've addressed that as well. But the truth is, what was put in place on this piece was complicated. It doesn't work for several years for American companies. It doesn't stop China. It doesn't stop anybody else from coming into our market. They can still come into our market, but it stops our companies from fully benefiting from a piece of this with consumers that's very important. So again, Mr. President, thank you very much. I object.